What do you share with a microbe that drifted through the primordial oceans 4 billion years ago? A single, unbroken thread of survival. That ancient organism endured a world you would not recognize. A planet swathed in molten magma, its atmosphere transformed by a poison of its own making, its entire surface locked in a global sheet of ice. For 96% of its history, our world has been a place where survival was an almost impossible feat. Oceans boiled, the air was a suffocating veil, devoid of the breath of life we know. Entire continents melted and reformed in a slow, violent dance, and across these eons, life was extinguished again and again. 10 times a great dying swept the globe. 10 times the evolutionary clock was nearly reset to zero. How then did the humblest single-celled bacteria begin a journey that would culminate in the reign of colossal dinosaurs? And why did that path require 4 billion years of trial by fire and ice? 4.5 billion years ago, our planet was born. Its surface was not one of land and sea, but a shoreless ocean of incandescent magma, a sphere of liquid rock where surface temperatures reached thousands of degrees under a sky with no air, no water, only fire and stone. As this inferno slowly cooled, a primitive atmosphere of methane and ammonia condensed from the vapors. Of oxygen, there was nothing. Then, a miracle. Water appeared, perhaps delivered by legions of icy comets on a billion-year bombardment, or perhaps steaming forth from the planet's own cooling core. A world ocean was formed. It was here, 3.5 billion years ago, that the first life emerged. Among these simple microorganisms were the cyanobacteria. These evolutionary pioneers achieved what no life had before. They learned to eat sunlight. Through photosynthesis, they thrived, flooding the oceans. But their triumph carried a terrible secret. The waste product of their existence was a gas that was lethally corrosive to the ancient world: oxygen. 2.5 billion years ago, this poison began to saturate the planet. The Great Oxygenation Event triggered the first mass extinction, an apocalypse orchestrated by life itself. This new oxygen reacted with the methane in the atmosphere, stripping the world of its greenhouse blanket. Temperatures plummeted. The Earth, once a crucible of fire, became a gargantuan snowball. For 60 million years, a shell of ice, kilometers thick, entombed the globe. Yet beneath it, in thin pockets of meltwater, the cyanobacteria endured. Slowly, the planet's fiery heart fought back. Volcanoes punched through the ice, venting carbon dioxide, rebuilding the atmosphere, until the Great Thaw began. The world had survived its own transformation, proving that even on a planetary scale, the most profound changes and the very foundations for our own existence are often born from catastrophe. But for the cyanobacteria, the architects of this new oxygenated world, the revolution was far from over. In the aftermath of a global glaciation, a deep freeze triggered by their own atmospheric pollution, a new breed of microorganism emerged from the slush. They learned not to fear the corrosive oxygen, but to harness it. They invented a radical new process: respiration. By breathing this volatile gas, they could shatter nutrient molecules with an efficiency previously unimaginable, unlocking 18 times more energy than their anaerobic cousins. And then, in the quiet depths, a pact was made that would forever alter the destiny of life. An ancient, larger cell, struggling in this new world, engulfed a smaller, oxygen-breathing proteobacterium. This was not an act of consumption, but of union, a revolutionary symbiosis. The captive bacterium was not digested, it was integrated. Over countless generations, it became the mitochondrion, the microscopic power plant that resides within nearly every cell of your body at this very moment, tirelessly producing the energy that fuels your every thought, your every breath. With this captured star burning within them, the first eukaryotes were born. Our most distant, single-celled ancestors had arrived, setting the stage for the next great leap, the audacious experiment of multicellular life. For eons, the oceans had been a microbial soup. Now, something utterly new was stirring. 538 million years ago, the fuse was lit on the Cambrian Pymol Kingdom was explosively drafted. All the fundamental body plans that exist today appeared in a frenzy of creation. Evolution invented the skeleton, hard parts, shells of carbonate, carapaces of chitin, The first internal scaffolding of bone provided armor and anchors for new, powerful muscles. The oceans, once silent, now teemed and clattered with life. Trilobites, the armored woodlice of the Paleozoic, scuttled across the seabed in their Miller Lucigenia. A creature so strange we long depicted it upside down, and above them all hunted the apex predator of its age, Anomalocaris, a meter-long terror with great grasping appendages lining its head and a circular unhinging jaw of razor-sharp plates, perfectly engineered to crush the shells of unfortunate trilobites. In this Cambrian crucible, the first chordates also appeared, small, unassuming swimmers who carried within them a profound legacy. They were the first of our own lineage, the ancestors of every vertebrate that would ever swim, walk, or fly. Yet this entire vibrant drama was confined to the water. The land was a barren, silent continent, but soon everything would change. During the Ordovician period, life began to test the shore. The first pioneers were humble, a green stain of algae, lichens clinging to rock. But they were a foothold, and where the plants went, the anima forays out of the water, scuttling across the wet sand before retreating to the waves. Wiped out an estimated 60% of all marine species. It was the first of the great dyings, a filter through which life had to pass. But life endured. In the Silurian, it reasserted its claim on the land with newfound permanence. The coastal zones were carpeted in mats of moss and the first primitive vascular plants. Arthropods, ancestors of millipedes, scorpions, and spiders, colonized these new green spaces. The first true terrestrial ecosystems were taking shape, and in the seas, a critical innovation appeared: the jaw. Fish were no longer just filter feeders or bottom grubbers. They could bite, they could hunt. A new arms race had begun. The true flourishing of this new age, so dominated by our aquatic ancestors, it is often called the Age of Fishes. The undisputed kings of these seas were the placoderms, the armored fish. Instead of scales, their heads and torsos were encased in thick, bony plates. The most formidable of them all was Dunkleosteus, a 10-meter, 4-ton behemoth. Its jaw was not filled with teeth, but with two shearing blades of bone that functioned as a living guillotine. It was the absolute ruler of the Devonian seas, but the most significant event of the Devonian was not happening in the water. It was happening at its very edge. Among the lobe-finned fishes, a group evolved fleshy, muscular fins supported by a sturdy bone structure, the same bone structure that exists in your own arm. Pushing through the swampy shallows, these fins became proto-limbs. Evolution tinkered, stretched, and refined, until one day a vertebrate creature heaved itself from the water and took its first gasping breath of air. The first tetrapods had arrived. By the end of the Devonian, the world they inherited was no longer barren. It was a humid, alien landscape of true forests, dominated by giant 30-meter ferns and club mosses. And hiding in the damp undergrowth, the first amphibians began their lives, forever tied to the water, yet carrying within their genes the blueprint for the complete conquest of the land. The great march from the sea had begun, an echo of a deeper, more ancient impulse, the relentless expansion of life into every conceivable frontier. The world became a single colossal forest. 359 million years ago, the Carboniferous period began, and with it, an age of planetary verdure. Continents clustered near the equator were smothered in dense, humid swamplands. There were no flowers, no birdsong, only the drone of insects and the whisper of wind through alien foliage. Giant club mosses, the lepidodendrons, soared to heights of 50 meters, their bark a mosaic of diamond-shaped scars left by fallen leaves. Towering ferns and horsetails formed a thick, seemingly endless canopy. This global forest exhaled life-giving gas on an unprecedented scale. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere swelled to an astonishing 35%, creating a hyper-oxygenated world that fueled a brief and terrifying era of gigantism. Insects, breathing through simple tubes, were no longer constrained by their physiology. The skies were patrolled by Meganeura, a dragonfly relative that commanded the air on wings spanning 70 centimeters. On the forest floor, the nightmare centipede Arthropleura crawled through the damp undergrowth, its armored body growing to a horrifying 2.5 meters in length. But amidst this gigantism, a quieter, more profound revolution was taking place. The first reptiles had appeared. Small and unassuming, they possessed an evolutionary masterstroke, the amniotic egg. It was a private ocean, sealed within a tough, leathery shell, allowing them to reproduce anywhere on dry land. This invention severed the final tie to the water, liberating vertebrates to conquer the continents. From these humble beginnings, a great schism occurred. The reptilian lineage split. One branch, the synapsids, held the distant promise of mammals. The other, the diapsids, would give rise to the lizards, the crocodiles, and in time, the dinosaurs. As the Carboniferous gave way to the Permian 299 million years ago, the synapsid dynasty began. They were the new masters of the planet. These were the beast reptiles, creatures on the evolutionary path to becoming mammals. The apex predators were the Gorgonopsians, formidable numerous herbivores on Earth, the Dicynodonts, strange tusked animals that were a bizarre fusion of reptile and mammal. The world belonged to the synapsids. The future, it seemed, was written in their bloodline. But the planet itself had other plans. 252 million years ago, the single greatest catastrophe in the history of life unfolded. The Great Permian Extinction. It was not an event. It was a process of dying that stretched across millennia. 96% of all marine species and 70% of all terrestrial vertebrates vanished. Life on Earth came closer to total annihilation than at any other point in its history. The trigger was unleashed in modern-day Siberia. A wound opened in the Earth's crust, a volcanic province that bled lava for nearly 1 million years. This was not a series of eruptions, but a constant planet-altering flood of molten rock that smothered a territory larger than all of Western Europe. The atmosphere was choked with a monstrous volume of carbon dioxide and methane. Global temperatures soared by 10 to 15 degrees. The oceans, starved of oxygen, became toxic graveyards. Acid rain, potent and relentless, stripped the land of life, altering the very chemistry of the soil. Ecosystems did not just decline, they shattered. Food chains snapped, link by agonizing link, in a cascade of EAI. The planet's convalescence took 10 million years. To comprehend this span, consider that the entirety of recorded human civilization is but 10,000 years. The recovery was 1,000 times longer. Yet life endured. Among the survivors was a squat, tusked herbivore named Lystrosaurus, in TATO's sheer persistence. The ruling synapsids, however, never fully recovered from the blow. Their reign was over. Into this vacuum of power stepped the diapsids. They weathered the storm and, in its aftermath, found a world of opportunity. They diversified with explosive speed, seizing the vacant ecological roles left by their fallen rivals. The Triassic period had dawned, and on the horizon, the age of the dinosaurs was about to begin. 4.5 billion years of planetary history, a journey from a molten sphere of magma to a world poised for titans. Life, born in the oceans over 3.5 billion years prior, had already endured planetary deep freezes and oxygen revolutions. Each ending was not a final chapter, but a violent clearing of the stage, making way for the next act. The story of life is not one of gentle progress, but of brutal interruption and improbable survival, written in stone and silence across the vastness of deep time. From the quiet depths of the primordial ocean, a revolutionary alliance was forged. Single cells, for eons adrift, began to cooperate, giving rise to the first complex multicellular organisms. This fragile union ignited an unparalleled burst of creation known as the Cambrian explosion, a biological Big Bang that sketched out the blueprints for nearly all animal life to come. The next great conquest was the land itself. Life crawled from the sea onto barren rock, and in its wake, vast alien forests rose to cloak the continents. In this new world, the reptiles appeared, their scales a perfect adaptation to a life away from the water. Among them, the great therapsids, the beast lizards, became the undisputed masters of the Permian Age, but their world was teetering on the brink of annihilation. The Great Dying arrived not as a single event, but as a planetary fever that suffocated the seas and poisoned the air. It was a cataclysm that erased more than 90% of all species, a silence that nearly became permanent. Yet from the ashes of this near-total extinction, a new chapter was written. the world was an empty stage, awaiting its next titans. This was the dawn of the age of dinosaurs. Extinction, it seems, is not merely an end, but a violent form of creation, clearing the slate for life's next and perhaps most spectacular masterpiece.